So, I've been playing an absolute ton of Genshin Impact. I am completely and hopelessly addicted at this point. MiHoYo has succeeded at getting the first $15 I make every month from now until the end of space and time. And as you do when you're addicted to something that's potentially damaging to your long-term finances and your emotional well-being, I go out of my way to try and get my friends and family hooked on this game as well. Now, normally that pitch goes something like, it's like Breath of the Wild, but with actually interesting combat. Oh, but also it's a gacha, but you don't really need to spend money on it to play it. Okay, I never said it was a good pitch, but it's a mostly accurate pitch. Or is it? Dun, dun, dun! You see, my personal experience is that it's a fairly free-to-play friendly game by gacha standards, but how can you tell? Well, that's what we're going to try and do today. We're going to try and see if Genshin is free-to-play friendly or not, using the power of statistics and shitty PowerPoint presentations. But Mellow Sip Slinky, you ask, why should I give a flying fuck if a gacha game is free-to-play friendly? Aren't all gacha games just shameless cash grabs? I mean, sort of, but at its core, the gacha model generally relies on whales, the people who are spending hundreds and thousands of dollars to support the system. But having a healthy free-to-play experience is important for a couple of reasons. You want to take advantage of streamers, peer-to-peer marketing, which, doesn't happen if your game is whale or bust. In the case of Genshin, I came across Genshin because of content creators on Twitch. I downloaded and tried it because it was free. I staked with it for, quite a while because so much of the content was readily available. And then eventually I got hooked, and that's how they drew me into their monetization model. If lots and lots of people see your game, give it a try, and stick with it, it's more likely that you can pull in a couple of whales. Community size is super important. Also, for the whales, they want to be able to show off all their fancy new toys to someone else. And it's probably important that those people don't have all their fancy new toys. It's a prestige thing, right? And as a low-spending player, obviously you care about how free-to-play friendly the game is because you want to be able to experience as much of the game as you possibly can without spending more money. The balance of the free-to-play systems are also important because it directly ties into power creep. Now, if you've never gone deep on a gacha game before, it's not a question of whether a game will have power creep, it's just a question of when. And again, you might think the reason for this is purely because they want to make as much money as possible. And while that's definitely one of the reasons, there's another less obvious reason, which is that new players need some way into the game. If new characters don't power creep old characters, the new players are always going to be behind. Venti is, in my opinion, the strongest character in the game right now. And there needs to be a character stronger than Venti at some point in the future, or else every new player is never getting a Venti until a banner gets rerun, right? Understanding how free-to-play friendly the game is also helps you put into perspective what you can do with the limited free resources you get. The decision of meta over husbando or waifu is very important for players who can't afford to pull for every new character. And, it's influenced by how punishing it is to miss out on your meta characters. And finally, I enjoy math and game balance and game design and talking about team compositions and blah, blah, blah. I can hear you getting bored as I'm going on with it. I'm a sweaty bastard with these games, and hopefully you get at least some enjoyment out of, one of the things I just mentioned. Or, maybe you just want to judge and laugh at me. Look, I'm in no position to comment. I'm making a YouTube video about game math, for fuck's sakes. Clearly, I shouldn't be judging anything. All right, Mellow Slinky, I am intrigued. However, you're just some random white dude on the internet with exceedingly average life experiences. What makes you qualified to talk about any of these things? To clarify, if you weren't listening a second ago, I'm not just a random white dude. I'm a sweaty random white dude who also studied engineering and likes math and science and synonyms for sweaty. Also, as an aside, I've always been vaguely uncomfortable with this part of gaming culture, in quotes. You should just be able to watch my video, listen to my points, and judge them on their own merit. But as I write this in my script, there's a voice in the back of my head that's going, nah, bro, but are you even good at this game? So, to get the voice to shut up here, these are pics from my account to show you that I am, in fact, a consistent 36-star pro gamer and have spent countless hours no-lifing Abyss between day one clears of new content, optimizing clears for fun. And oh god, I'm about to ironically say I'm actually... please. This is where we're going to stop. I can click the buttons, I can build the teams good enough to clear Abyss consistently. Please accept this as a token of my gamer cred, and let's never, ever talk about it again, okay? All right, enough stalling. Let's get to the good part. Okay, well, not so fast. Regardless of what my stats mark from university says, I am, in fact, a responsible statistician, so we need to clarify some things before we just throw up some numbers and twist them into a shape that vaguely fits the narrative I'm going to try and spin. If we're going to try and use numbers to talk about game balancing Genshin, we need to be specific about what numbers we're going to use and why. First off, regardless of what MiHoYo or your friends might say, co-op in this game is literally useless, both as a mechanic and, to look at from a number standpoint. You might not need to whale to beat the content in this game, but the fact that for co-op you can be playing in a party with someone who has taken out a second mortgage to play this game means it's a very poor measure of what's actually good for the average player. So we're not going to use the data from any mode that can be done in co-op, which leaves us with the sweatiest possible game mode, Spiral Abyss. And specifically, we're going to look at floor 12 of Spiral Abyss. Obvious reason for that, it's the most challenging content in the Abyss, the highest level, a lot of enemies you can ever fight. Even in the overworld, you don't have higher enemies than that. And this has some problems, obviously, because it's really only 6 challenges of specific enemy and buff-debuff configurations. Like I said, though, the problem is floor 12 is just so much harder than anything else in the game that could give us a more comprehensive overview that, abstracts out enemy compositions or the buffs and tries to give a more balanced, holistic overview. And even if there was some way of testing against level 100 enemies, like the buffs and debuffs aren't something we can apply randomly, so we're kind of stuck with Spiral. Now, just looking at how often a specific character gets used in Spiral Abyss floor 12 is bad data for a number of reasons. Like I already said, floor composition matters a ton. If you remember the first run of Spiral Abyss, it was all cryo. So even if Ganyu existed then, she would not have been very good in floor 12. We also have to deal with some other factors, like how common it is to own a particular character. Pretty much everyone's going to have a copy of most of the 4 stars, but the 5 stars, not everyone might have, and that's going to influence how often they get used. There's also knowledge barriers. Like if the community doesn't value a character specifically well, even if that character is very good, it won't show up in usage stats. There's that inherent bias of the player base against certain characters. We also have to account for weapon and gear availability. If you have a 5-star weapon for a particular carry, they're going to do much better for you than for someone who doesn't. And if your artifacts are better for one element or the other, there's a whole bunch of factors here. But really, like I said, this is the best of the bad data. So this is pretty much the best thing that we can use. And unfortunately, we only really have one good patch worth of data, which is 1.5. So we can't do a longitudinal look at character balance. This is also going to be missing the 1.6 latest system buffs miHoYo did for Elemental Mastery. I'll mention that briefly. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference for these stats, and you will see why in a brief moment. Now for the good stuff, those sweet, juicy numbers. What we have here is a Google sheet that I got from ripping off this Reddit user. If you're watching lvlUrArti, thanks for figuring out how miHoYo's API works. Sucker! But no, actually, thank you a bunch for making good content. I appreciate you greatly. There are 2 numbers that we're going to care about a lot. The first is raw usage percentage, which is just how often a character gets used in Spiral Abyss floor 12 runs. Note this is on either team of the 2, but since you can't run characters on both sides, there's not going to be any funky percentages we have to worry about. No character can ever go above 100. The second factor is what lvlUrArti calls presence, which I think is actually a very useful metric. It's the raw usage adjusted by what percentage of accounts own a given character. There are ownership stats for all the characters as well, which are somewhat interesting, but I think kind of outside the scope for this video. If you're interested, go check out lvlUrArti's post for more info. See, I gave you a shout out. Please, Pete, don't be mad at me for shamelessly stealing your data. Now, because I don't want you to hurt your neck burying your face into the screen, let's put these numbers into a nice graphic form. Drum roll! Ha! Gotcha! First, one more quick aside about statistics. I swear this is the last one. If you've studied stats before, this picture in front of you should be giving you some horrible university flashbacks. This distribution is called a normal distribution, and it's a super common occurrence for random datasets to fall into a pattern roughly like this. Now, character usage in a game isn't a random, naturally occurring phenomenon, so it's probably unlikely that we get a nice normal distribution for usage. We do, however, have about the perfect number of characters for the top 5 and the bottom 5 to line up with one standard deviation. So in other words, if we wanted to make a clickbait top 5 and bottom 5 characters in Genshin list, it would actually have some, and I'm really stretching the use of some here, mathematical basis. So in addition to looking at our graphs and seeing if it's roughly normal, we can look at top 5 and bottom 5 for funsies. Okay, this time for real, let's get these numbers into a nice graphic form. So this first slide is the raw usage for a given character. And I'm going to mention quickly that this is an average because obviously we have 2 spiral phases in every patch, so we're combining both of the phases here. The clear winner from this data is Bennett, probably unsurprisingly is one of the top healers in the game, one of the best characters in the game, available at 4 stars, and he's had 2 runs in the glitter store. So basically everyone who wants a copy of Bennett has had a chance to get one at this point. He's also really strong and the best boy in the game. He's just so sweet and wholesome, and if you read his lore, he's just the nicest boy, deserves all the best things in the world. I just want to protect him, okay? Anyway, we have a few other 4 stars near the top of the charts, Diona, Jingqiu, Zhanling, and with some expected 5 stars in Venti, Zhongli, and Ganyu. Now, when we adjust for how often the character is actually owned, what we would expect to see is that the 5-star start to overtake Bennett and move further up. And the data actually shows this. So having data sets that are this nicely behaved is not something I'm used to from university, just putting that out there. But we do see Ganyu, Venti, and Zhongli all overtake Bennett. And we also see Zhao shoot up right near to the top. This makes a lot of sense. He's a 5-star carry. He's quite strong, but he also came out in really close proximity to Ganyu and Hu Tao. So I assume what's happened there is that ownership is kind of split between the 3 carries, but it's very, very likely that if you have one, you're running it. Also because he's a top-tier quality husbando, but scrubs are too busy simping for waifus. Okay, you mentioned clickbait top 5 and bottom 5 Mellowslinky. Can we see the data like that? You fool! Do you think I would really miss the opportunity to make a clickbait list? Of course not. I need to drive up numbers for the channel. Oh god, I forgot. I'm still on the slide. There we go. Congratulations, you made it to the clickbait. Feel free to take a screenshot, share this with your friends, and leave the video with a comment, like, and subscribe. Actually, no, wait, please stay on. There's like 5 more slides. I swear it's worth it. So this is the raw usage stats turned directly into a clickbait list. I just took the rankings and I directly posted them in. So characters are in fact sorted within the tiers. And this is that earlier list that's just raw usage. This is not adjusted for how often the account owns the character. We've got Bennett and Diona safely within the OP Mustpill OMG broken tier, S++, when we look at raw usage. However, when we adjust for ownership as well, then my best boy Bennett is unfortunately the only 4-star who remains as an OP top 5, and Zhao just manages to sneak in by edging out Hu Tao. Putting aside me jokingly disparaging Ganyu and the other waifus in this game, she is still the undisputed queen of the adjusted tier list and the DPS charts. If I had to guess why, it's probably because of how well her damage scales in AoE team fights. You know, as much as I've used her in Abyss, she's always been great in pretty much everything. Our poor Animo Traveler is the undisputed bottom of both versions of the list, right next to Amber and Lisa. So yes, random person watching this, you can in fact feel smug about your take that heard their Amber and Lisa real bad, heard their. Now with the clickbait out of the way, I actually do quite like this graphical format because it does make it a lot easier to conceptualize the data and format my thoughts for some takeaways. So if you spent any time following the theory crafters, the other sweaty people in this community, the whales, the people who enjoy playing Spiral Abyss, you'll see that the data generally lines up for the power characters. You know, the community consensus of the weak starters and the 4-stars also generally lines up, although there are some notable exceptions. I mean, Kaya is a clear one. Kaya is very, very good, and he's kind of in the middle, which I assume is a bias against using him. If we look at our clickbaity stats and consider the top 5 or the top 10 characters even in the game, there could be as many as 3 to 5 of the launch 4-stars in that list. And like 1 or 2 of them we've actually gotten free copies of, which is a little surprising to me. Like, that paints a pretty good picture for our free-to-play folks. On the flip side, though, basically all of the bottom 10 characters are 4-stars, except for everyone's favorite lolly zombie. I mean, she's the only lolly zombie. Yes, I just roll with it, please. Continuing on, the new 4-stars that we've gotten since launch have definitely been hit or miss. Diona is obviously super useful as one of the few healers we have right now. Rosaria is fairly powerful, probably a little underrepresented in the middle of the tier list, and then Xinyan and Yanfei are both doing fairly poorly, and I do think are a bit on the weak side. The new 5-stars, however, have all been fairly good, but it's interesting to note that the ones who seem to be performing the worst are the first handful that we got in 1.0 and 1.1 after Venti. Klee and Tartaglia are still doing fairly poorly, and Zhongli received significant buffs from his launch state, and now he's in the top, but if we had released Zhongli, I expect he would be kind of middling as well. Now, I don't think this data lines up completely with absolute character power. I want to be very clear on that. There are some clear and obvious exceptions that if you've looked at the math, you just know for a fact. Beidou is particularly egregious because her elemental burst is insane. It's so much damage. It's one of the highest damaging bursts in the entire game. She's an insane swap carry, and she really should be higher. Finally, if we want to predict how this is going to change in the future, remember those EM system buffs we talked about? They don't seem to be game-changing for our Electro characters because of how inconsistent Electro reactions are to trigger. It should help the already strong Animo characters be even better in like Venti and Sucrose. It's going to be a little bit of a buff to Jean. Animo Traveler is still likely in dead last after all this. So, lots of interesting stuff to take away from this list. But what about our main question? Does this paint a picture of a game that is well-balanced for the free-to-play folks? Well, sort of. Shrug. I mean, let's think about it this way. You need 8 characters for Spiral Abyss, and it seems like we have about 5-ish top-tier 4-stars in the game. if we take this data as the holy truth. And this means you have to fill out the remaining slots with either weaker 4 stars or your 5 stars. And if you're willing to be a meta player, it's not inconceivable that you can be patient and wait for the really top tier options to come out. On the flip side, if you want to pull for waifus and husbandos and say fuck the meta, then you're still likely to have pretty solid pieces for your teams in your 4-star cast. Now, I do want to be upfront here. I definitely have some bias here because I am a filthy, filthy meta hoe. I am an unashamed Morgana abuser. My second squad is basically always some version of a super invested national team with a 5-star weapon on my Zhanling. If you don't know what those words mean, it's basically the 2 most commonly used team compositions that use many of the top tier characters. So yes, obviously I would love to spin the narrative that you can build strong teams in Genshin without spending tons and tons and tons of money, because that makes me feel good about myself. And to be upfront, my account is not a true free-to-play account because I buy the Battle Pass and the Welkin Moon basically every month. Look, I really enjoy this game, and I have the means to support some light spending on it in order to be able to get more of the content. However, I do want to note that I've never purchased Primo Gems, so this is an account that has never bought currency for pulls. So I do still need to be careful with my savings, plan out what I'm going to spend on, similarly to an F2P player. I'm kind of like an F2P plus player. Regardless, if you aren't dropping money on gem refreshes and you need to plan out what and who you pull for, I definitely recommend patience. This is what I'm sitting on as of the recording of this video. I'm going to be honest with you, it is fucking hard not to give in and pull a little bit. God only knows I could use some serotonin while stuck at home all day. My week will aside, though, it's hard to comment on exactly how many Focus 5 stars a random free-to-play or low-spending account might have access to, because it's just so luck-dependent. But from my experience, all the time I've spent looking at Genshin content and the math we've been looking at, it seems entirely reasonable that a free-to-play account, completely free-to-play, by the way, not like my free-to-play plus bullshit, can eventually get to the point where 36 starring Abyss clears are definitely possible. And of course, it's just a game. Have fun. I might have a nervous breakdown at the thought of being unable to do a 36 star clear every reset, but you aren't even missing out on that much if you can just make it to floor 12 and try your best for 3 or even 6 of those last 9 stars. And on top of that, even the bad characters can eventually just brute force their way to 36 stars by just grinding out better gear and levels and talent levels. And, considerations of balance at the present don't really mean a ton, because we don't have any sort of PvP content right now. So like I said, eventually you can just outgear everything. But Meadow Slinky, if that's how you feel, then why did you make me sit through this entire video? Because I said right now, you dingus, pay attention! Look, Spiral Abyss keeps getting harder with new enemy types and challenges being added, and who is to say what's going to happen in the future? If we're going off of Honkai, which is MiHoYo's other game, they have Spiral Abyss, but there's a PvP aspect to it where you're competing with other people for scores to get higher rewards. So it's not unheard of that they might do something like that in Genshin at some point. And all those other reasons I mentioned at the start of the video, I had a whole slide about it. Okay, so what can we guess about the future of Genshin? This is me trying to guess at the future. We're pretty past the point of the stats and even the bad stats informing this. This is based on the stats, but this is also from my opinion. Venti has been meta-defining since the very beginning. Zhongli launched on the weak side and received significant buffs from MiHoYo. Now, do you think this is purely due to community feedback? Don't be so naive. I think it's more likely they want the Archons to be meta-defining, because there's also a resonant storytelling reason for this. Archons are these powerful gods that gift out visions to characters. They're central characters in the plot. There's lots of reasons to want to make them powerful and to make the players excited to pull for them. Now, the Liyue trio of carries, our Ganyu, our Hu Tao, and our Zhao, are all incredibly strong. 4-star carry options haven't been anywhere close to the power level of those 3, and those 3 even crept the 5-star carries that we had at launch. It's interesting to consider whether this is going to be a trend. I assume that each new region is going to bring with it some power creep to incentivize players to pull for the new characters that will tie into the new chapters of the story, and you see how this makes a lot of sense, right? Now, there are 2 questions this leaves me with. First, when are we going to get new meta-defining carries in Inazuma, and how much stronger are those new carries going to be than the current options? If we look at what has been announced and what we can expect in the future, Kazuha doesn't seem like he's going to be competing with Zhao for a carry slot. He seems more like a hybrid support. He feels kind of like an Animo Albedo to me. So Yoimiya or Ayaka are likely going to be our first look at Inazuma carries and what they might be like power-wise. On the 4-star side, the OP release 4-stars have basically been untouched this whole time, with the only addition being Diona joining the club. And that means MiHoYo is roughly 1 for 4 on making super strong 4-stars. Is this going to change with Inazuma? I don't know. Directly power creeping the 4-stars we have is kind of tricky because they often play the role of a synergy piece in a team. It seems more likely to me that new 4-stars are going to open up new team compositions, but it's always possible that we just get a new Bennett tier character who drastically changes the game. And when I say Bennett tier, I don't necessarily mean another healer. I just mean another 4-star with incredibly pushed power and flexibility who can be a central piece in enabling multiple team compositions. I assume this is going to have to happen eventually, but it's also possible that Bennett was a mistake from MaHoYo and they aren't looking to make another 4-star be this centralizing for the meta. We'll have to see. On the bright side, the slow rate of release on new 4-stars means that there probably isn't any rush for maxing out your constellations on new OP 4-stars. You're probably going to have a lot of time for it. So that's good. Finally, the last thing you have to remember is that gacha games love to add new systems to help ease new players in. Remember when we talked about power creep earlier? Adding new systems not only gives old players new things to farm for, but also helps new players catch up to accounts that have been around and farming the old content for a long period of time. We've seen this already with new artifact domains, but it's entirely possible that even more drastic system changes happen at some point. We have data in the game for talent levels up to level 15, but we can only push to 10 right now. So it seems likely we're going to get those extra talent levels at some point. Another thing that seems unlikely, this is just, me putting my tinfoil hat on, but I think would be super cool, is if we could unlock delusions for the characters that allow them to use other elements. Not going to lie, I got suckered into pulling Tartaglia in no small part because of how cool his Electroform was during the boss fight, and because I kind of just want to chuck a whale at someone. And, that's it for our look into some of the F2P balance of Genshin. Now, I know what you're thinking, and yes, I am legally obligated to put all of this in the last slide. If I don't, the algorithm police are going to come and put me in jail for not trying to up my YouTube numbers. You know the drill. Like, comment, and subscribe, and maybe I'll make some more shitty PowerPoints and yell about other gamer stuff. Thanks, bye!